received some really great questions. Some of them are going to be really deep questions, questions that going to take a moment for you both to think about. They're going to come from the heart, and some of them are going to be lighthearted questions. So it's going to be a mix of both. Some of them are about you personally, and some of them are a little bit more about Unitarian Universalism. So we'll have a mix of everything, all right? So I'm going to put you on the spot first, Rob. Are you ready?
I think so.
Okay. All right. So for those of us who weren't part of the process and maybe weren't here for the service, how did you come to decide that you wanted to apply to Fourth Universalist Society as a music director?
Oh, thank you. Great question. It's just a great place. I mean, the answer to that is encapsulated in what this institution is, and I can't begin to kind of talk about what interests me specifically, but I guess I could codify to a few things, which is just there's so much, I think, programmatic potential here. I think it's very clear what Unitarian Universalism stands for, and I find there are several avenues that extend out of that kind of really interest me as a composer, as someone that likes to work with communities, someone that likes to program music, curate experiences. I think I was very attracted to the idea of what Fourth U stood for in the greater UU scheme of things, and and just what general Unitarian Universalism stands for. I'm still figuring that the UU abbreviation out. But yeah, in essence, I feel I can contribute a lot of myself and my concern for continuity in programming, I think best in an environment like Fourth U. So I hope that answers it.
I think so. Thank you. All right, so this question is going to be for both of you. We'll start with Reverend Schuyler. Can you tell us, what are your grounding spiritual practices?
Good. It's a great question. Grounding spiritual practices, something that I think Unitarian Universalists often struggle with because we don't have a prescribed spiritual path or practice or tradition. And so sometimes we leave ourselves out in the cold a little bit, both as like individuals, but also as communities. So it's an important one for us all to think about. What are those things that like keep us going and keep us grounded? For me, there's a number of things. I think getting outside is a big, important one. Recognizing within myself when I need to sit and take a breath and not do anything. I was thinking the other day how like rare it is for me just to like sit someplace, even in my own living room, and just like not do something. And how I imagine that before smartphones and before the internet and before TV, people spend a lot of time just sitting there thinking about things, and how like that I do that so rare now. And so that is a spiritual practice for me, noticing my own anxiety about doing that when I don't have something I really need to do, but actually just like I can just sit here and look out the window, or I can just sit here and like allow myself to feel comfortable on my sofa or in a chair or something like that. I also find reading to be a spiritual practice. Reading in ways that both sort of grip me in my imagination, but also ones that open up space for sort of a practice. I think poetry does that. I think there's sort of prayerful ways of reading certain forms of scripture, but also just different kinds of writing that allows you not to necessarily be gripped by a thing, but allows to open your space in your mind and heart that you can kind of be more present with the reality around you. So I try to get a look for those sort of things. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, what's your favorite poem?
Oh, I don't know. I was just sorting my poetry shelf yesterday, and there's a lot of great stuff out there. I mean, UUs love Mary Oliver. Obviously, I like Gregory Orr a lot. Marge Piercy. There's just so many. And you hear all my favorite poems who get to be read in the service, because that's what I try to have a whole Google Doc that's like 50-some pages long of all the poetry that I collected and I like, and I try to thematically tie him in. So that could give you a good sense of who my favorites are.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your grounding practices and some of your favorite poems and books of poetry.
Thanks.
All right, your turn, Rob.
All right, so first question was grounding practice.
Grounding, yeah.
So being 5'3", I'm naturally closer to the ground than most people are. When it comes to, I think, spiritual grounding, something where I can feel like, I'm just motivated by my sense of self and not through modalities of capitalism or something where I need to be productive all the time. That's very hard, especially I think as a musician where your craft and the thing that is your sort of, the thing that makes you, tense and have to, refine yourself and constantly self-evaluating, disciplining yourself, is also the thing that gives you that sort of sense of spiritual self, right? So kind of creating a dichotomy between those two things is very important. Something I like to do within the realm of music is, well, I call it spiraling, which isn't quite the best term for it, but I think it's most accurate, is, just sitting at my piano for 30 minutes a day and just playing what comes to mind in kind of a mindful, guided way. That's something I find myself doing a lot more these days, is giving myself kind of ample space and breathing room to improvise ideas at the piano, or obviously in some cases it comes with rehearsing material, but I really try to set a separate time of day where I'm making music for the sake of the creation, right? And not for the sake of any sort of outcome-based scenario where there needs to be a deliverable at the end, right? I'm doing it with the intent of destroying it at the end, with the intent of not preserving it. In some cases I'll take a voice memo recording. I'm sure many musicians, creatives do like to do that. I find it very helpful in preserving the moment, but there's nothing like the actual moment itself, right? So I find there's spiritual practice in kind of the transience of not attaching yourself to an outcome when you're improvising on an instrument, and just focusing on, this is what I'm making now, and that's fine. Right? Kind of like mandalas, right? That sort of thing.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah. And then the other question was favorite poem.
Oh, that was specifically for Schuyler because he was mentioning poems, but I have one for you later, so don't worry.
Great, okay. It would be L'Infinito by Giacomo Leopardi. It's a good Italian poem.
Oh, great. Oh,
That's about it, yeah.
nice. All right, so this question is for Schuyler. Okay, so I'm going to ask this one first. How does the individualism of the first principle, so the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and the community obligation of the seventh principle, so the interconnected web of all existence, interface to inform the living tradition? So how do we combine the individual and the group?
Important question, and I appreciate it. For those of you who are new to our congregation and to Unitarian Universalism, there are 8 principles that are commitments that we make, that are value statements for us. And so the first and the seventh are often sort of seen as important pillars specifically. And the first one is more individualistic, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and the communitarianism of the seventh principle is also very important. I mean, I think we see these in tension constantly in our society, right? The rights that we have extending to certain points until they infringe upon the freedoms and rights of other people. And so I think, for me, I think for our communities, your rights, this is all line, like your right to swing your arms extend just so far as they don't hit someone else's face. And like there's part of that for our faith too, right? Like we are able to be here doing what we're doing, pursuing our own spiritual journeys, so long as it doesn't actively create harm for other people around us. There's a reason why I think, even in the opening, what we said today, you can have any theological beliefs you want, you can come from anywhere, you can love whoever you want to love, so long as you are united in love and justice, right? So it's not, you can just do anything you want, because that's who you are, and as a person, you can do anything, you can believe anything. There are limits, and the limits are that things have to be done in love and justice, in the commitment to those larger principles. And how that gets defined, of course, varies depending on where you are and what you're doing. But I think it's important that one's individualism does not trump the communal good. And that is, I think, that's a fundamental challenge that UU congregations have, because we like to be individualistic. many of us have come from faith communities where we have been harmed, or maybe our individualism has been minimized or disregarded. We're not able to be who we really are or want to be. And so we guard that very carefully, and as we should, but it also means that sometimes we can be reactive to those past traumas. And so here we try to do our best to affirm everyone's worth and dignity, because it's not about rejecting anyone's, but also saying that we can affirm every individual's worth and dignity, but also say there are certain behaviors or actions or way of being together that ultimately are harmful to other people. And so we want to be careful about that too.
Thank you for helping us understand the two and how they can be together. Okay, so Rob, tell us more about the music that inspires you. So this would be your favorite, it could be your favorite musician, your favorite composition. That would be more that kind of question. And then you can share a little bit about your musical tastes, perhaps. And all right, this is like a long question, so if you forget any, I'll ask it again. And then if you have a song that you love to inspire the rest of us. So one would be what inspires you and your taste, and then what would inspire others.
Yeah, great question. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to do the cop out and say my favorite music to create is the one I'm making at the moment, right? I would say, the answer is in front of you, those of you who have worship aids that are reading the little program notes I include. I'd be remiss if, as a musician, you're not, of course, being conscientious about the music you're picking and being passionate about it. Especially what's great about Fourth U is just, there's a lot of justified freedom, like, freedom that can be justified in this sort of music programming process. And I have to answer that, whatever I'm making or playing each week is, of course, my focus for the moment. But I know that's not like the overarching answer. I mean, I have an interest in a variety of different types of music that kind of brought me along the path. I studied classical piano literature in undergrad, and I play viola. I play in orchestra. I would say my favorite style of music is one where I'm a small part of a contributing whole. Like where I'm a small part, not like like big, like face, like, oh, it's Robert and people behind. I'm like, accompanying him. I'm for when that happens, I'm happy to put myself into that. But I think it really is as kind of ubiquitous as that answer. Like anything where I'm a contributing part to a greater communal good, especially like, for example, like playing last stand viola in a symphony orchestra, or playing in a jazz ensemble, or even better, being part of the orchestration or arranging process of a jazz ensemble. It's really like about the process of being in a larger context for me. That literally will define my music tastes. For example, like orchestral literature. The past few years, I've been really into checking out Brazilian music, and the idea of like a samba roda, where people are in a circle and playing music. Each person's contributing to the form of the music, but it's not really like the spotlight on one person. Everyone gets their moment, of course, but it's really about like what the unified sound is. So that really just interests me, like literally anything where people are like justifying a common and established communal good and contributing themselves to it in some small way. I find that that's the music I'm really attracted to. It's like large ensemble stuff, anything that involves like community. So, and then a specific song, it really depends. I'm sorry to cop out again. It depends on what we're singing, and if it makes sense with what we're doing. I think it's the role of the song more so than the song itself. Like if I could go like through my iTunes playlists and say, people like, there's again a lot of like Brazilian musicians that write incredible music. People like Ginga, he's a guitarist from Brazil that plays a lot of the like musical popular brasileira, which is like music that's emerged in the last like 30 years. He's a really amazing songwriter. There's a lot of great, of course, like Duke Ellington, like Billy Strayhorn. People that emerge out of the Black American music tradition. There's so much to admire and all of that. Any song, again, is going to be the cop-out, that if it's programmatically relevant, I think that it will be my favorite, and it will be something that I think, I will enjoy and hope to communicate that joy to other people. So I hope that's not a cop-out answer. I mean, it's really about the context.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. I was telling one of our members this morning that what I love about the music is if it inspires me to dance, then you're doing a great job. So I hope others feel inspired to dance by your music too. So this, your response leads me to another question for Reverend Schuyler. How do you choose the services on Sundays?
Yeah, so it's one of the hardest things I have to do, I think, is choosing the theme, because it's just this pressure. I feel pressure to think about what am I going to be able to talk about, what's going to inspire me to think about something that's going to be interesting to all of you and engaging as best I can. And it's like limitless, which is amazing. There's a whole world in Unitarian Universalism. We don't have like a scripture reading that I have to base off of, like in a lot of Christian congregations do, and that can be that's like restrictive, but also guiding. So I have a list of things that just pop into my mind sometimes, of like, maybe it's an article generates this, maybe I'm going around and I have an experience of like, oh, I could give a sermon about that. Sometimes I've noticed that when like bad things happen to me, those are great sermon topics. And there are like little ways of making them less bad, of like, oh, this is unfortunate, at least I get a sermon out of it. And that will sometimes be. I try to think about like what are the conversations that our country and our world are having right now? Like, where are those tension points, or where are there values conflicts that are interesting to sort of nuance or dissect a little bit, or what are the things that need some moral clarity around, or at least spoken to? And I try to balance the topics so they're not always the same kind of vibe, right? So it's not like every single week I'm like getting up here and like ranting about some cause that I care about. I try to have services that are about personal stuff, but also about Unitarian Universalism, but also about social justice, and also about other things too, that community connections, like we did with the Latimer House a couple weeks ago, so that people feel like that there's a variety of themes and a variety of ways we're talking about the world, and it's not just always sort of the same note, because I think that gets dull and it gets a little bit preachy, frankly, if you go too much in one direction. So I also say that like on the staff level, we talk about it. Like we talk about like what are the upcoming services and like how do we want to do things, and we always look for partnerships, like we did with West End Synagogue, and look for ways of like, okay, who can we work with to create kind of a really interesting thing, right? Like what is a kind of a service that can be an event, so that we can all come together and say, here's this cool thing that's happening. And so we try to attune to that too. But there is no one way. They all kind of just come in, and we try to sit down and have the month of calendar to go through.
All right, so I want to ask two fun questions, and then we can take a break. Okay. All right, so my first fun question is, Rob, who do you want to win the Super Bowl?
So, so if it's not evidenced by the fact that I erroneously scheduled an organ roundtable tonight during the Super Bowl, I'm not super attentive to the needs of sports, especially when they're not New York teams. But this is funny. I think you'll have, I was literally just talking with Cynthia. I better memorize the names of the teams who are playing before I come up here, because I'm sure there was going to be some question. So who's playing? The Chiefs and the
Eagles. Philadelphia and Kansas City.
I guess Philadelphia is geographically closer to New York, so I'll offend less people by saying the Eagles.
Okay, all right.
Right. Sorry, that's not the answer. Yeah.
Eagles fans are happy.
Great.
All right, Schuyler, so are you going to go for the Chiefs?
Well, so I grew up in Wisconsin and we're Packers fans, so I have a pretty strong loyalty to that, but Kansas City is in the Midwest. But my mother's family for generations is from Philadelphia. And they're also an NFC team, which is where the Packers are, and so there's some like NFC, AFC rivalry. So I'm really conflicted. I don't know if I'll be at the Oregon thing tonight, not watching Super Bowl either, but I'm going to say I'm probably going to root for the Eagles too. Yeah.
Thanks. And I don't watch football. We watch the other football in our household, so we do the soccer. We're Arsenal fans. All right, and then the other question is, okay, so this is the other fun question. If you could, oh wait, we'll start with Rob. If you could have a pool, an in-ground pool in your backyard, like a very big one, okay, filled with anything, what would it be?
So this pool is in Manhattan. Like I have enough surface area to live in Manhattan where I have a pool.
Yeah, like you're like Rihanna rich, okay?
Wow.
Yeah.
Filled with a pool filled with anything.
Anything.
I don't know. Maybe water and chlorine. That's a nice enough scenario where I think I'm rich enough to afford anything in the pool, like different
Right.
each day. So, yeah, I think either that or like Bach or texts or something where I can just like go into the room and read the manuscripts of Bach and then leave or something.
Great, perfect. All right, Schuyler, you're also Rihanna rich. And you have this amazing pool in your backyard. What would you fill it with?
I'd fill it with, make it a gigantic hot tub, because I do not like cold water, and I would love the idea of swimming in pools, but I would like that, and make it chlorine-free, because I think, there's if you have enough money, you can do that, and that's better for you, apparently. It's all the rage in the rich people circles.
Yes, pond pools.
Yeah. So I would do that. I'd stick with good old-fashioned water, but, chlorine-free.
Very nice. All right, round 2 is going to be short and sweet, so you folks can enjoy your coffee hour and ask Schuyler and Rob more on-the-spot questions. All right, so Reverend Schuyler, can you tell us how parenthood has changed your spirituality?
So for those of you who don't know, we have a 2-year-old in our lives now, Rowan, who is, he's definitely changed both the practical, I think, and also the spiritual things about life. There's a couple ways that I can think about him influencing us. The first is just how you sort of see a sweetness in children and also adults, thus as sort of former children, and you recognize the vulnerability of life and also sort of this desire to protect it. It's been surprising thinking about worrying about Rowan as a child and as a person, and how protective you are of children and of your own child in a way that you don't necessarily think about, because I didn't think about before we had him, and how it is at the same time sort of remarkable and disturbing how when people decide to wage wars and bomb cities, to not think about all the babies that are there that are in danger, right? Or how hard it is to feed babies when you're in a war zone like Ukraine, and how much suffering they must be feeling. And, as someone who is responsible for one little child, it's really sort of heartbreaking to think about that throughout history, all the time that things have been bad, that there have been these little beings who, sort of hope and trust in the adults in their world to take care of them, and how we are not up to the task of living into that trust, and how much we've failed, the youngest and so most vulnerable amongst us, when they have asked us to do that. So that's something that's been sort of sobering for me. I think the other side of that is that, you don't know sort of what it's striking to me, like how much affection you have for your child, at least, and how much you see yourself being at risk of being destroyed if something happens to them, and how scary that is, that, you see how fragile you become in their own fragility, that if something were to happen to him, how it would wreck me, I know, in a way that I don't know if I would have ever been wrecked before. And so, little beings are very vulnerable, one wrong fall and off they go. To imagine that, and to imagine that happening and then having it see your own emotional devastation is like really something. It's something else. And so there's sort of a humility and carefulness that I feel like it is inspired within me, where life's fragility is really present, in like a beautiful way, but also in a very terrifying way, because like in any moment you can just kind of have your life ruined in a really profound way. Um, so those are things that came up. I mean, there's obviously a really beautiful thing to have a child, and that seeing that little person do amazing things and seeing Rowan grow and laugh, and like there's something really special about that. But I think that fear is one of the most profound things that I think I've noticed that have come out of this.
Thank you. Rob, what is your vision musically for Fourth U in 5 years?
Okay, yeah, in
We'd like
5
to keep
years.
you for 5 years, at least.
Yeah. So exactly, yeah. So in 5 years, I want to take what we have and augment it. That's the short answer. Okay. More specifically, through the implementation of a strong choral ensemble. I'm hesitant to use the word choir because that's a little Christian Anglican coded, right? But some sort of choral ensemble that reflects our needs. And of course, with that, the implementation, hopefully of an organ back into worship. Again, this all falls onto what we have currently, and to augment it and to do my best in kind of serving what we stand for as an institution, right? This is all going to fall under that. So, of course, I'd like to, be fostering a team of volunteers, a team of people that are interested in music, and many of you have responded to my initial inquiry that I sent out over email. I think a very sizable number of people reached out, and I've been meeting so many people individually this month and just kind of getting to know people, because I'm still in the kind of onboarding stage, right? So that's been great. That's been a really fun, tangible way for me to meet people and kind of act on my idea of wanting to establish, really strong team of volunteers, of course. And then from there, talk about integrating the organ in worship, augmenting what we have through the sound of an orchestral palette every week, and of course, fostering an instrument that is not indicative of who we were in 1904 when the original Hutchings-Odie organ was installed, but something that's indicative of who we are and what our community is now in 2023. And that's why I'm very specific in saying I'd like to take what we have currently and who we're serving currently and augment it. So those two things, and of course, hopefully through the eventual successful curation of some sort of concert series or something where we really turn Fourth U and continue to turn Fourth U into a space where people who are not necessarily comfortable in a concert hall or in a church, but some sort of third place where people can kind of present something that they have to say artistically. Of course, that includes the championing of people in our community, also, of course, people of color, people that have very individual narratives that they can share with us that we might not encounter in our day-to-day life. Any sort of diversity in thought, and what I can try to be an intercessor for with the people that are in our community, and also people that are not in our community that can be brought to Fourth U and kind of see what we stand for. So it'd be just great to be an intercessor for that. And again, this is all just falls under taking what we have, what incredible institution this is, and serving it, right? So that's the answer.
Wonderful. I like to have these ideas, what we can work towards. Thank you for sharing them. All right, and our last question, Schuyler, this one's going to be a tough one for you, but I know you can do it. What do you hope your legacy here is going to be at Fourth U?
Geez, legacy, yeah. Well, I've been here, this is the end of my 7th year. I'll be going on sabbatical in March. My plan is to stick around for a little while, at least. I don't have any plans to leave. So legacy, it's hard to think about legacy. I mean, I think this congregation has, its history is both very grand and also very troubled. And so that's an interesting history to have inherited, right? We had a congregation that had an organ funded by the Carnegies that had P.T. Barnum as a member, and Horace Greeley, who ran for president against Grant, was a member here. Oscar Hammerstein attended here when he was a teenager, there's a legacy here that's really profound. And also, like, in the last 100 years, its congregation has really struggled. There was a time where it went down to like 6 people on a Sunday in the 50s. Every minister has basically left unhappily at various points. And so I think coming from those two things, I mean, I think I would be very happy to leave here feeling like this congregation was vibrant and thriving, that it was healthy, that you show up on Sunday and feel like people were happy and they loved coming here and they left feeling better, and that it felt full and a lively place, and that life didn't depend on me and whoever is the minister, because I think that can really happen a lot of times. Organized religion is dying in this country. It's particularly on sort of the liberal mainstream side of things. And so for us to be a counterweight to that, I feel like is really important. I'd love to have this building fixed and restored, and we're getting there. You can see all the work happening here, and there's going to be work on the plaster. We can't fix all the plaster work yet because the roof is still new enough that there may be water dripping down, and you can see it getting worse, which is that like it's working its way out of the stone. But like, I want to move. When I got here, a lot of people talked about this congregation being scrappy, and I think that is a sign. That's like a word that describes a certain, survival and endurance against tough odds. And like, I can super admire scrappiness. It's what you have when you have your back against the wall. But I would love us to get from a place of scrappiness to vibrancy, where people don't come in here and feel like, oh, this place, sure, they're survivors, but they're thrivers. And I would love this congregation. I think we've had a lot of, even my 7 years, a lot of adversity. We were here, my first year, we had swastikas carved onto the front doors and a bunch of Nazi hate speech. That was intense. We took in a family for sanctuary, and that was intense. We really didn't know if we would be able to stay here until we raised enough money for our building to fix the roof, and that was intense. And then the pandemic, of course, was a whole other thing. So I would love to get to a point where like we're not reacting to stuff, and we're just here, and we have a community that's grounded and happy, and that I feel like I could be part of that legacy, and that people felt like that continued well after I was gone. But I don't hope that happens anytime soon. So we have a long time, I hope. Yeah.
Great.